Most men think blocking her or begging her to stay is a form of strength, but in reality it's the fastest way to lose respect. Both actions come from the same emotional place: panic. Blocking is usually done out of anger or wounded pride, while begging comes from fear of loss. Even though they look different on the surface, they communicate the same message underneath. I don't have control over my emotions, and I need you to regulate them for me. That message is never attractive. When you block her, you're not showing confidence. You're showing that her behavior got under your skin enough for you to react impulsively. Emotional reactions give away power. They tell her that she still has influence over your mood, your decisions, and your sense of stability. Attraction doesn't grow where reactions are unpredictable. It grows where there is calm, grounded presence. Begging does even more damage. The moment a man pleads, explains, or tries to convince her to stay, he places her above him emotionally. He's saying, "You are the prize, and I am afraid to lose access to you." That flips the natural dynamic. Respect fades when a man positions himself as disposable, dependent, or desperate for validation. No amount of logic or emotion can repair attraction once that frame is broken. What most men don't realize is that women don't respond to words in emotional moments. They respond to energy and behavior over time. Long messages, explanations, and emotional speeches don't bring clarity. They bring pressure. Pressure suffocates attraction. The more you try to force an outcome, the more resistance you create. Silence, on the other hand, allows emotions to settle and perception to shift. Emotional self-control is one of the strongest signals a man can send. When you don't block, don't beg, and don't explode, you communicate inner stability. You show that you're not ruled by fear or ego. You demonstrate that your sense of worth doesn't rise and fall based on her reactions. That kind of composure naturally commands respect, whether she admits it or not. This doesn't mean you tolerate disrespect or chase confusion. It means you choose response over reaction. You step back, not to manipulate, but to regain your center. When you remove emotional volatility, the situation becomes clear. She either steps forward or she doesn't, and either way, you remain solid. A man who can regulate his emotions doesn't need to announce boundaries or threaten distance. His behavior speaks for him. He understands that walking away calmly carries more weight than any emotional confrontation ever could. Strength is quiet, confidence doesn't argue, and self-respect never begs. So instead of blocking her in anger or begging her out of fear, do nothing impulsive at all. Stay composed, stay grounded, and let your restraint do the talking. Most men are uncomfortable with silence, especially when emotions are involved. The moment communication slows down, anxiety kicks in and the urge to fill the gap becomes overwhelming. That's why they double text, over-explain, or create unnecessary conversations just to feel connected again. What they don't understand is that constant communication kills mystery, and mystery is one of the strongest drivers of attraction. Silence isn't emptiness, it's space, and space is where curiosity is born. When you step back and stop chasing, her mind finally has room to process your absence. Attraction doesn't grow when you're always present and predictable. It grows when there's contrast. When access is reduced, value becomes clearer. This isn't about playing games or trying to manipulate emotions. It's about allowing the natural psychological response to occur when something familiar is no longer constantly available. Most men believe they need to explain their feelings, clarify intentions, or fix misunderstandings through words, but attraction doesn't operate on logic. The more you try to reason your way into someone's emotions, the further you push them away. Silence removes pressure. It allows emotions to settle instead of escalate. It gives her the opportunity to miss you rather than feel overwhelmed by you. Silence also communicates confidence. A man who is comfortable with space signals that he trusts himself and the situation. He doesn't need instant reassurance or constant validation. He's not afraid of losing control because he's already in control of himself. That calm restraint is rare, and rarity creates value. When you don't rush to fill every gap, you demonstrate emotional security without saying a word. Another powerful effect of silence is that it shifts the focus inward. Instead of reacting to her behavior, you return your attention to your own life. Your energy moves back into your purpose, your routines, and your growth. This shift is crucial because attraction weakens when a man's emotional center is placed entirely in someone else's hands. Silence helps you reclaim that center. From her perspective, the absence is felt before it's understood. She notices the change, she senses the emotional space, And in that space, questions arise. Why isn't he reaching out? What is he doing? Did I misjudge his value? These questions are not triggered by explanations or confrontations. They are triggered by a noticeable, calm withdrawal that carries no resentment. Silence also filters outcomes. If she values you, the space will draw her closer. If she doesn't, the silence saves you time, energy, and dignity. Either way, you win. You're no longer trapped in emotional loops or chasing clarity from someone who isn't ready to give it. You allow actions to speak louder than words. The key is intention. Silence should never come from bitterness or the desire to punish. It comes from self-respect and emotional discipline. You're not disappearing to provoke fear. You're stepping back to maintain your frame. That difference is felt, even if it's never verbally acknowledged. When you understand this, silence stops feeling like loss and starts feeling like power. You stop fearing the quiet moments because you know they're doing more than words ever could. And often, in that silence, the dynamic begins to shift in your favor without you lifting a finger. Most men think distance has to be loud to be effective. They announce it, justify it, or turn it into a dramatic statement. They block, unfollow, post indirectly, or send one last emotional message explaining how hurt they are. What they don't realize is that anger is still engagement. It's still emotional investment. And emotional investment, when it's reactive, keeps the power exactly where it was before. When distance is driven by anger, it communicates volatility. It tells her that she can still provoke a reaction, that her actions still dictate your emotional state. Even if the reaction is silence, if it's charged with resentment, it doesn't create attraction or respect. It creates tension, and tension without stability doesn't draw someone closer, it pushes them further away. Quiet absence works differently. It doesn't accuse, it doesn't punish, it doesn't demand to be noticed. It simply removes access without explanation. That kind of distance forces reflection rather than defense. When you disappear calmly, there's no argument to win and no emotion to push against. The mind fills in the gaps on its own. Blocking is often misunderstood as strength, but in most cases it's a form of emotional escape. It's done to avoid discomfort rather than demonstrate self-control. When you block out of anger, you're saying you can't trust yourself to stay composed. True strength is being able to step back without needing to erase someone from existence. Calm withdrawal shows maturity and emotional regulation. The same applies to confrontation driven by frustration. Explaining how much she hurt you might feel justified, but it rarely leads to the outcome you want. Emotional explanations put pressure on the other person to respond a certain way. Pressure triggers resistance. Instead of feeling your absence, she feels accused. And once someone feels accused, they stop listening and start protecting themselves. Letting her feel the absence without attaching anger allows the emotional weight to settle naturally. There's no guilt trip, no forced empathy, no attempt to control the narrative, just a noticeable shift in energy. You're no longer available in the same way, and that change is felt more deeply than any emotional speech ever could. This kind of absence also protects your dignity. You're not lashing out, you're not burning bridges out of ego. You're choosing to remove yourself from a dynamic that no longer feels aligned. That decision doesn't need to be explained or justified. A man who respects himself doesn't argue his value. From her perspective, anger gives clarity. Calm absence creates uncertainty, and uncertainty is what triggers reflection. She's left to interpret the change on her own terms. That's far more powerful than telling her exactly how you feel, because emotions discovered internally carry more weight than emotions handed to someone. Most importantly, quiet absence keeps you grounded. You're not replaying conversations, checking for reactions, or monitoring outcomes. You've made a decision and returned your focus to your life. That internal shift is what ultimately changes the dynamic. When you're no longer emotionally reactive, you become unpredictable in the best way. The goal isn't to make her chase or feel guilty. The goal is to maintain your frame and self-respect regardless of the outcome. When distance is clean, calm, and free of resentment, it speaks louder than anger ever could. When a man's focus revolves entirely around a woman, his energy becomes narrow and fragile. His mood depends on her responses, his confidence rises and falls with her attention, and his sense of direction slowly disappears. This is where attraction begins to fade, not because he cares, but because he has nothing else anchoring him. Shifting your focus back to your purpose is not avoidance, it's restoration. Purpose gives a man structure. It gives him something to move toward that exists outside of emotional uncertainty. When you're training your body, building your career, sharpening your skills, or pursuing a meaningful goal, your identity stops being dependent on someone else's validation. This independence is felt instantly, even if nothing is said. Energy changes before words ever do. Most men underestimate how much emotional dependence leaks into their behavior. It shows up in over-availability, quick replies, and the subtle need to be reassured. None of these things are intentional, but they're noticeable. When your life lacks depth, relationships become the center of gravity. And when that happens, attraction slowly turns into pressure. Redirecting your energy back into your mission does something powerful. It resets the dynamic. You're no longer chasing clarity or reassurance because your fulfillment isn't waiting on a text message. You become less reactive because your emotional stability is supported by progress elsewhere. This doesn't make you cold or detached, it makes you grounded. As you build momentum in your own life, something shifts internally. You stop seeing the relationship as something to hold on to at all costs. Instead, it becomes something you choose to participate in, not something you fear losing. Choice is where strength lives, neediness is where it dies. From her perspective, this shift is undeniable. A man who is engaged with his purpose moves differently. He speaks with more certainty. He listens without urgency. He's present without clinging. These traits naturally command respect because they signal self-trust. People are drawn to those who are anchored, not those who are drifting. Purpose also protects you from emotional spirals. When communication slows or uncertainty appears, you don't collapse inward. You move forward, your schedule stays full, your routines stay intact, and your self-image remains stable. This consistency is attractive because it shows resilience. You're not shaken by temporary emotional fluctuations. Another important aspect is that purpose forces growth. Growth changes perception. As you evolve, you naturally raise your standards and become more selective. You're no longer trying to fit yourself into someone else's expectations. You're evaluating whether the connection aligns with the life you're building. This subtle shift restores balance. Shifting focus back to your purpose isn't about proving anything to her. It's about honoring yourself. When you're aligned with your mission, you don't need to demand respect, you naturally attract it. And whether she steps forward or fades away, you remain solid-centered and in control of your direction. Most men lose leverage the moment they let emotions dictate their responses. When she reaches out, uncertainty and excitement collide, and the instinct is to say too much, explain everything, or immediately seek clarity. That reaction feels natural, but it quietly communicates that you've been waiting, overthinking, and emotionally invested in the outcome. Strength isn't shown by how fast you respond or how much you say. It's shown by how composed you remain. Responding from strength means you don't let emotions rush your decisions. You pause before replying, not to create tension, but to maintain control over yourself. This pause signals that your life is moving forward regardless of whether she texts or not. You're not sitting in anticipation. You're grounded in your own world. That subtle energy shift is powerful because it removes urgency from the interaction. When men respond emotionally, conversations turn into interrogations. They ask where she's been, why she pulled away, or what she wants now. These questions come from insecurity, not leadership. They place pressure on her to provide reassurance, and pressure erodes attraction. A strong response doesn't chase clarity. It allows clarity to reveal itself over time through consistent behavior. Brevity is another sign of strength. You don't need paragraphs to communicate confidence. Calm, direct responses show that you're comfortable with yourself and the situation. Over-explaining is usually an attempt to control perception. Under-speaking allows your actions to speak instead. The less you try to manage the outcome, the more natural the interaction becomes. Tone matters more than content. A man responding from strength doesn't sound defensive, sarcastic, or overly enthusiastic. His tone is neutral, relaxed, and self-assured. He's not trying to win approval or prove anything. This emotional steadiness creates safety, and safety is a prerequisite for attraction. Responding from strength also means you don't reopen emotional wounds unnecessarily. You don't revisit old arguments or seek closure in the moment. You understand that emotional conversations require the right timing and context. Not every interaction needs depth. Sometimes, maintaining composure is more impactful than addressing everything at once. Another mistake men make is mirroring her energy too closely. If she pulls back, they either pull back with resentment or push forward with intensity. Strength lies in consistency. You don't punish distance and you don't reward confusion. You remain steady. This steadiness subtly communicates boundaries without having to state them. Strong responses also protect your self-respect. You don't respond just because she reached out. You respond when it aligns with your values and availability. This reinforces that your time and attention are valuable. You're not always accessible, and you don't need to be. Availability without discernment lowers perceived value. Over time, responding from strength reshapes the dynamic. She begins to sense that you're not easily shaken, not easily pulled off center, and not dependent on emotional reassurance. That perception changes how she interacts with you. Respect grows when emotional reactions disappear. The goal isn't to appear distant or calculated. The goal is to be emotionally disciplined. When your responses come from clarity instead of emotion, you naturally take the lead without force. And that calm leadership is felt in every interaction. Most men try to control outcomes because they're afraid of uncertainty. They hold on tighter, explain more, and search for the perfect move that will bring things back to how they were. But the moment you try to force a result, you give away your power. Detachment isn't about indifference or emotional shutdown. It's about releasing the need to control how someone else feels, chooses, or responds. When you detach, you stop negotiating with your self-worth. You no longer measure your value by her attention, consistency, or approval. This shift changes everything. You move from hoping for a specific outcome to accepting whatever outcome reveals the truth, and truth is far more valuable than temporary reassurance. Detachment naturally reverses the power dynamic because power lives where need disappears. The person who needs less has more leverage. When you're okay whether she stays or goes, your behavior becomes relaxed and authentic. You're not performing, persuading, or proving. You're simply being. That authenticity is rare, and rarity creates attraction. Most men misunderstand detachment and think it means becoming cold or unavailable. In reality, it's about emotional neutrality. You're present but not attached to results. You care, but you're not controlled by that care. This balance is what keeps you grounded. You don't swing between intensity and withdrawal. You remain steady. When you stop trying to control the outcome, you also stop reacting to every emotional shift. Her mixed signals no longer trigger anxiety. Her silence no longer feels like rejection. You observe instead of react. Observation creates clarity. Reaction creates confusion. Detachment also sharpens your standards. When you're no longer afraid of losing someone, you begin to evaluate the connection honestly. You ask yourself whether her behavior aligns with what you want, not whether you can adapt yourself to keep her. This internal shift restores self-respect and naturally changes how you show up. From her perspective, detachment feels like strength. She senses that you're not trying to trap the situation or lock in certainty. There's freedom in that. People are more drawn to those who don't try to possess them emotionally. Detachment removes pressure, and pressure is the fastest way to kill attraction. Another powerful effect of detachment is emotional clarity. Without the noise of fear and expectation, you see patterns more clearly. You notice effort, consistency, and intent without bias. This allows you to respond wisely instead of emotionally. Wise responses shape outcomes more effectively than reactive ones ever could. Detachment also ensures that you win regardless of the result. If she steps forward, it's because she genuinely chooses to, not because you chased or convinced her. If she fades away, you don't collapse. You've already made peace with that possibility. Either way, you keep your dignity, direction, and self-respect intact. The man who can walk away without resentment holds the strongest frame. He doesn't threaten distance or announce boundaries. He simply lives in alignment with his values. And that quiet confidence is what ultimately shifts dynamics in his favor.